What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior writer at BamaOnLine.com, and we're back with the BOL Basketball Show, joined as always by Tim Watts and Blake Byler. And not so much of a pleasant week to recap. We've always been joking about how Alabama's been undefeated since we started the show. Can't say that anymore. But it's the start of a tough stretch for Alabama here these last 7 games. We knew that. Not an ideal start, going 0-2 against Auburn and Missouri, though. And we'll kind of start with that Iron Bowl of basketball with you guys, because Alabama welcomed number 1 Auburn to Coleman Coliseum. Just an electric atmosphere. We're going to touch on that and talk about that a little more in depth here in a minute. But when you look at the Auburn game, a 94-85 loss, Alabama wasn't great at the rim. They shot below 50% on layups. Didn't have a great shooting night overall, which I think some of that is in due part to what Auburn did defensively. But when you look back at this Auburn game, Tim, what's the thing that sticks out to you the most?
I think they looked kind of like the moment might have been a little too big for them. It just felt like they were pressing a little bit too hard. I mean, they had 6, 7 turnovers, which is maybe be the season low. I don't even know. They kept going to the rim. Mark had some issues down there. Mark wasn't hot, which is, he's kind of the heartbeat of that team. I just think the pressure of that week was a lot. I think the distractions were a lot. Maybe that's what I said. It reminded me a little bit the year Alabama LSU played on a smaller scale, and everybody was Alabama looked tight in that game. I thought the basketball team looked a little tight in this game, but at the same time, I thought they battled their butt off. Auburn's a great team. They're very old. They're very seasoned. They're very experienced. They play good basketball. I thought Broome had a terrific game and all that stuff. Cliff just had problems dealing with him, but he was giving, everybody the business. He was doing that step back and everything that he does. Mark not having a good game, kind of hurt, because you count on Mark so much and, getting to the basket. You could tell that was their game plan to attack a little bit more. But I thought they battled hard against a really good team. And that whole week was nothing but talking about that game for Alabama, seeing people on campus and everything. So I think maybe that maybe that would have been better on the road for them where they didn't have to deal with it. But I mean, I give credit to Auburn. I thought Auburn was a good basketball team and they were smart. They made big buckets, but Bama battled a really good team hard. I know for the fans, it's not enough just to battle them hard, but I mean, that's the number 1 team in the country. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to Auburn. They came out strong. I think it was a 9-0 run to start the game. So Alabama had to dig out of a 9-0 hole. And you're right. I mean, early on, I didn't think Cliff Amore played very well. He came out pretty quickly, but I thought he really bounced back when he went back in. And that's good to see. But, the way they shot from 3, the way they shot just in general, not encouraging. But it's kind of crazy, Blake, when you look at it. We talked a lot before the game about the cutting down on turnovers. Alabama needs to limit Auburn on the offensive glass. The second chance points, Auburn can't just be dominant in that. And Alabama took care of business in all of those areas. But then you go from shooting like they did at Texas to then just almost a 180 from a production standpoint on offense against Auburn. That was less than ideal.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty crazy because the things that we talked about before the game that Alabama kind of needed to do in order to win, they did. They kept turnovers down. They out-rebounded Auburn by, I think, 9 total, and it was by, I think, 6 or 7 on the offensive glass. So they were able to keep Auburn off the offensive glass. They collected some O boards themselves, but really it just came down to not making enough shots. And it sounds really simple, but sometimes that's what the game of basketball kind of boils down to. It's just who makes more shots in a given game. Auburn did a really good job answering anytime Alabama kind of caught back up, and especially in the second half when they tied the lead twice. They tied it at 65. Tahad Pettiford went down and hit a huge shot. Then Chris Youngblood comes back on the other end and hits another shot to tie it at 68. And then they go down, and Chad Baker-Mazara hits a 3 to put Auburn back up by 3. So it felt like every time Alabama got close, Auburn had one more make in them to kind of keep Alabama at arm's length and hold that lead. I thought offensively, you look at scoring 84 points and you think that should be enough, but then you look at kind of the percentages and what it boiled down to. I mean, they were under 40% from the field, 48% on layups, which is pretty inexcusable. You're not going to win very many games doing that. Then they were, I think, 19% from 3. They only made 5 3-pointers in that game. And so you had a lot of opportunities to kind of capitalize on open looks, make layups, make open threes. They did it, and Auburn did. And Auburn had a lot of open looks that were due to some kind of defensive blown assignments or whatever. But ultimately, if Alabama had made a couple more layups, made a couple more threes, that they had the opportunities to make, and the open looks were there, it could have been a different story. There are a number of things Alabama could have done differently in that game, but really missing 50% of your layups and missing over 80% of your threes isn't going to cut it against anyone, especially the number one team in the country.
I think too, like Alabama has another opportunity to face Auburn later in the season. It's the regular season finale, and that's in Neville Arena. But before that and before anything else, I think we should give kudos to the Coleman Coliseum crowd because it was packed. You hear it all the time on press row, people kind of joking about the attendance, which it hasn't been bad. That's kind of a made up narrative. And I always tell people, like, look, you have to wait until the lights come up after the anthem to get a real feel for the crowd, because that's when everybody is mostly in their seats. It's going to be a packed house. Well before that, maybe an hour before tip off, that place was packed. The students showed up early. They filled in quickly. People got to their seats. When Alabama went off the floor early for warm-ups, that place was electric. And kind of going back to what Blake was talking about, that kind of exchanges, when Alabama and Auburn were kind of sharing punches back and forth. When Mark Sears hit that three, I think to cut it to 63-60, that might be the loudest I've ever heard Coleman Coliseum.
Yeah,
it was amazing. Like the lid was blowing off when he hit that.
Like
that's a deep jumper too.
Like, this is a different story in and of itself, but the Wi-Fi was atrocious. I think that's a credit to how many people were in the building, how many just media were in the building trying to use it, and how many people were just in there using their phones and things like that. But trying to figure out how your computer can work in a hostile environment like that, and then hearing that, not necessarily seeing it, but hearing it was a cool experience. And I've covered a lot of games at Coleman Coliseum, a lot of bad games, and that moment it still resonates with me just because of how loud it got. And Tim, you weren't in Tuscaloosa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just what was it like from just watching it on a TV standpoint?
I was there when Petway went back door when Blake was negative 11 years old and hit that layup when Ernest Sheldon made that pass to win the SEC. And that was I'm not sure that could be top, but it was right at that level when Mark hit that. I could tell, not even being there, the excitement, the crowd. You could see, a lot of times you can put it on mute and tell how loud it is if you look at the faces in the crowd. Yeah. And I'm a little crazy for knowing that, but I do that stuff. And you could see they were losing their mind. I mean, you could see the grabbing the hair, going crazy, the hugging each other. I thought the week itself was great, not just for Alabama, but for Auburn, for the state of Alabama, for the SEC. I thought it was amazing. As a longtime basketball lover, I never expected to see it. I never expected to see anything resembling that, but to see it, I know Bama came out on the short end, but overall, that's very much positive for everything we wanted to see for college basketball.
And the thing is, like, College Game Day was a little less cool, I guess, to experience like in person, because last year being the first time, it was a neat experience. I think Blake can attest to that too. And this year it was kind of just a carbon copy, but like the environment for this game was much better. And look, there are big moments that stick out in your head. I think the Trevor Relaford buzzer beater against Georgia, now nice. Like almost 15 years ago, is crazy. The game when Herb Jones is playing with one arm and makes his free throws against LSU. Those are moments that stick out. But for you, Blake, I know you've been in Coleman Coliseum a ton of times too. Just where does it rank, and what did you think of the environment overall?
I mean, I thought it was probably the best environment I've ever seen. Coleman Coliseum. There are some games that stick out. I remember Nate Oates' first year when they played Auburn. That game was insane from a crowd perspective. And then 2 years ago when they had the 17-point comeback and had to go to overtime against Auburn to win the SEC, that was another one that is kind of up there. But I mean, that moment that you were talking about when Sears hit that three, and then I think like a possession later, Nelson found a loose ball and dunked it to tie the game. Like that is probably the loudest I've ever heard that building. I mean, it was incredible. And just the entire day, And the week of buildup was great. Like you said, Tim, like I didn't think I would ever kind of see this from basketball in the state of Alabama. It was the most watched college basketball game on an ESPN network this season. I think 2.8 million viewers for a regular season college basketball game is pretty insane.
Yeah.
Like that just goes to show you how far basketball has come in this state. And it's a credit to Nate Oates. It's a credit to Bruce Pearl and these two programs. It's cool to see. And it wasn't the result that we kind of wanted to see. Alabama didn't play maybe to the level that they would have hoped for a number 1 versus 2 game at home, the first ever 1 versus 2 SEC game in men's basketball. But it was still a great environment, a great experience, and it's still cool to look back on.
Now, Nato's mentioned it after the game, how he didn't want the Auburn loss to kind of trickle into the Missouri game, kind of like last year when Alabama hosted Tennessee for College Game Day. Then they went on the road and kind of got spanked by Florida, if we're being honest. And that kind of happened again. Going on the road against Missouri on Wednesday night, Alabama lost 110-98. Another slow start for Alabama, falling in a 12-0 hole. And we'll talk about that again in just a little bit. But it's a night where Mark Sears went off. He had 35 points, but I think we can all agree that that's the worst defensive performance of the season. The offense was there for Alabama to score 98 on the road against a top 15 team. It's not easy to do, but you give up 110. That's pretty inexcusable. I think that's the second most points, at least in conference play, given up by Native's coach team in his tenure. But Tim, when you look back at this Missouri game overall and from a defensive standpoint, what kind of stands out to you?
I watched it again this morning just to make sure my thoughts were kind of where I wanted them to be. But I think it was a perfect storm of they hit tough shots. They hit tough shots, compounded with getting a bunch of open looks. I mean, those backdoor screens, I don't know how many times they hit that backdoor cliff. Somebody didn't rotate somebody. I mean, it was easy layups, easy dunks the whole day. But to me, Missouri, I mean, you can throw the top. And last night alone, Missouri played like a Final Four team. I mean, they completely out of their mind. Mitchell was a force, and the Grill kid was hitting tough shot after tough shot. I mean, if you went underneath that screen, you were in big trouble. They won't shoot like that all the time, obviously. But they shot the ball. They ran the ball. They were fast. They kind of Alabama'd Alabama. I mean, quick off a miss, get down the floor and shoot. Again, this won't mean much to most fans, but I was impressed. I really thought they were about to get blown out. I thought they weren't, and to come back the way they did and to push it into the game, and there was moments where they never could get over the hump. I mean, once they were down 12-0, they never battled back from there. But there were times in that game I thought they were about to get ran completely off the court. And again, you want something promising from it. I think we just saw last year's Mark Sears completely for the first time where I'm shooting. I'm not facilitating. I'm shooting. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a scenario they move him off the ball, get, Aiden or Phelan bringing the ball off the floor and let him shoot, because the more Mark shoots, the more better as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, he had 4 turnovers, which was tied for the team lead. And Alabama had 14 of those, which led to 21 points for Missouri. But you're right. I mean, Mark was aggressive. He was 12.
Didn't he have none in the second half, though? Did I read
that?
Yeah, they were early. Yeah, but it's
the thing about these two games I'd like to add real quick is Bama's nip and tuck with both of them in the second half. They tied Auburn in the second half. I think they beat Missouri by 1 in the second half. That slow start, here tell you where they're getting in a lot of trouble. Slow starts to the first half and closing out the first half. Auburn, what was that, a 2-point game? Next thing you know, it was 7. I mean, they've got to go tit for tat when they get in those first 3 minutes and the last 3 minutes going into halftime.
Yeah, no doubt. And like the game against Missouri, I think Sears is really good. But Alabama, like you said, like they were able to kind of claw back. They cut it to 6, and then you felt like, okay, there's something here. And then you blink, and Missouri's back up by 15. And Natos was frustrated. He was frustrated throughout the night. He got his first technical of the season, throwing the clipboard. It's kind of funny. A game after he gets on the mic and tells people not to throw stuff on the court, and he's breaking the clipboard on the floor. But
how is that a technical? I don't understand how breaking your clipboard is a technical.
Because it flew on the court.
Yeah, it kind of exploded a
exploded.
little bit. Yeah,
I thought he was holding it so they could karate chop it. I thought this was like Let me
No.
show
So he
my
like
pop.
threw it down on the court. And
he was holding it, and
exploded onto the court.
Nate's holding it one hand and punches it with the other, and then like the marker and like the frame of it just kind of flew to midcourt, and so
I mean, it was a moment.
Well, there
That
were
was a
some
moment.
like that the Mark getting called for a flagrant in the same sequence. There's a lot in that game. That's a whole different discussion. But when you look at this game against Missouri, Blake, what kind of sticks with your mind? Is it still just the defense and kind of how bad it was?
I mean, it was terrible. Like, you can't give up 110. I don't care who you're playing. You can't give up 110 points. Worst, I would say it's the worst defensive performance I've seen Alabama play, but I was in the building in Rupp last year when they gave up 117 to Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a little bit worse than this. One thing I will say, and I agree with kind of what Tim said, like, that they didn't get run off the floor, and I think there's something to be taken away from that. Like, that's a good thing. Going down 12-0, and then they kind of tried to stay in it, and then after the Sears flagrant and the Oates Tech, they were down 20 with still like 4 minutes left in the first half, and I was like, they're going to lose this game by like 30 or 35 points the way this is going. But that didn't happen. They went on like a 15-8 run going into halftime. We're only down 13 at halftime, and they got it all the way down to 6. So they didn't roll over like they did in that Florida game a year ago, which I think is a little bit of a difference. But still, defensively, so many of the things that happen can't keep happening. Like, it was a problem against Auburn where on either ball screens or screens away from the ball, the guards just aren't fighting through it, and it's leaving a lot of open shooters. They're not staying attached to shooters, which is leaving guys open, and that's an effort thing. That's not a schematic thing. That's a, do you want to fight through a screen and stay attached to a shooter? Do you want to put forth that effort to do it? And then I thought they got better with that as the game went on. The intensity kind of turned up a notch, both on the ball and off the ball, as the game kept going. I thought the intensity defensively was good in the second half, and then Missouri realized that Mark Mitchell can beat whoever is guarding him one-on-one, whether that be Cliff Amore, Grant Nelson, Mo Diabate. Like, it didn't matter who was on Mark Mitchell. He was either scoring or getting fouled and going to the line last night. And so whenever you have a big that can beat pretty much anybody one-on-one, on top of the fact that you weren't staying attached off the ball and giving them quality looks, like that's not a good recipe. And so Missouri played great basketball. I mean, that's the best offensive game they've played all season, probably the best offensive game they will play all season. And Missouri's a good team too. Like, according to, I saw it today on barttorvik.com, since January 1st, Missouri has played as the best team in the country. So that tells you how good this Missouri team is and how well they're playing right now. This isn't some like bottom 4 SEC scrub team that Alabama rode and got beat by. That doesn't make what they did excusable, and that doesn't make it okay. But these are 2 really good teams that Alabama just lost to. So it's okay to kind of take a deep breath and acknowledge that there are some things that they need to fix, but also it doesn't mean that the season's over. It's still February.
And like, I'm going to preface it by saying this, and it's carrying over your point you just made. Like, Alabama's played 2 of the best teams in the country last 2 games. And then you look at last year, how often was Nate Oates harping the defensive end of the floor and how big of an issue it was. And then Alabama goes on and makes the Final Four. But with these last 2 games and really, certain points throughout the season, how concerning is the defense as Alabama's schedule doesn't let up? They still have more ranked games ahead. They have 5 more games ahead against ranked opponents before the SEC and NCAA tournaments start. Just how concerning is the defense right now for you, Tim? Is it?
It's big. It's big to me because of the confusion. I mean, that's the part. I mean, you look, we saw in the Auburn game, Mark was visibly like disagreeing with whoever went over, who went under, or who rolled. He was like having words, and sometimes that's Mark himself. You never know. You never know who actually didn't play that the right way. But it was the confusion. And last night I feel like they ran that same play to Mitchell like 3 times in 5 possessions. I mean, I don't know if those numbers are right, but it was that same come up near the free throw line, set a screen, he'd go back door. Nobody rolled with him. So it's concerning for me because I mean, nobody had over 4 rebounds, right, except for Mo. Mm-hmm. And only one had. You have Jaron Stevenson, Cliff, and Grant, almost 21 feet of length there combined, and they have 9 rebounds total. That's insane to me. To prove Blake's point, effort. Mo D gives us the effort, right? He had double-digit rebounds, and I'm not saying they're lazy. I'm saying they're not fighting. And right now, these are fist fights. Every single game's a fist fight. The next two's a fist fight. The final three, I'm not even sure that's a battle royale. You know what I mean? That's a Pulp Fiction scene in an apartment. That's what you're facing with those last three games. So you got to fight. You got to be angry. And I will say, Mark's shown to me there's a lot of coolness to Mark's game in the early part of the year. I think now we're seeing fired up, pound my chest, let's effing go Mark, which I think's the best Mark. We saw him carry a lot through there. But Jaron Cliff, especially Cliff, Grant, you got to fight harder. Gave up some offensive rebounds in both games. Again, effort.
What about you, Blake? How concerning is the defense the last couple games?
It's concerning. One thing I want to correct myself. Missouri hasn't been the best team in the country since January 1st. They've been the fourth best team in the country.
Oh,
so
wow. Get it right, guy.
I wanted to make
now we're really upset they lost. Come on, Bama.
So the point is they've been incredible, and they've been a very good team, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them end up as like a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament the way they're playing.
To our credit, we've talked about this team during the year. When we mentioned coaches of the year, we mentioned the big
Dennis
ones,
Gates.
and we kept saying Dennis Gates go first of all, to win 5 games in this conference after last year is a tremendous improvement. But to do what they're doing, to look like they look, I mean, to me, I don't know if you can't, if you don't give it to Bruce Pearl, Todd Golden's done a great job too. But man, there's some coach of the years in this conference, man.
Yeah, there are. But as far as the defense goes, like I think it's concerning the level of effort that we've been seeing, but I think it's a little different than last season, because last season they borderline looked incapable at times. Like they were like you watched them play and you were like, this team not only isn't trying enough and not giving enough effort defensively, but they just don't have the personnel to be good defensively. I think this team does have the bodies and the athletes and the personnel to be a solid defensive team. I don't think they can be elite. I don't think they've shown the potential to be elite, but I think they can be solid to good. And we've seen that in spurts. I think they were good against LSU. I think they were good against Georgia. I think they were pretty solid against Texas and Arkansas until the last 3 minutes of that game. Like, they've shown that they can be decent defensively. And even the numbers agree. Like, last year at this point, I think they were 111th, 112th in defensive efficiency. And even factoring in last night's numbers on KenPom, they're 46th. So it's not that bad. The last 2 games were bad, but overall it's not as bad as maybe it feels after giving up 110 last night. So I do think there's a lot to fix. Obviously, there's a lot that they can fix. There are things that they can do to improve, and I think they can be better. Like, if they really lock in to the scouting report, figure out these different specific things that they need to do to get better, which I'm sure Ose will be all over them about the next couple of days leading into Kentucky. I would expect a better defensive performance against Kentucky, and I think they have it in them. We just haven't seen it consistently.
And before we get to our last 2 topics, if you guys haven't signed up for BOL, we have a promo this week. It's $1 per week for your first year, and that's for new members. So if you've been thinking about kicking the tires on BamaOnLine, now's a good time. Recruiting is going to ramp up. We have plenty of basketball to talk about. Spring practice will be here in less than 2 weeks. I've got some exclusive stuff coming up on the site later this week. So still plenty to talk about, more than hoops, but that's what we're here to talk about today. And kind of the last thing on these last 2 games that I want to touch on, it's not really the last 2 games. It's kind of been a problem over the course of the year, but these slow starts, we talked about it. You fall in a 12-0 hole against Auburn, or a 9-0 hole against Auburn, you lose by 9 points. You fall in a 12-0 hole against Missouri, you lose by 12 points. It's not as cut and dry as that's the difference in the game, but a better start could certainly play a big factor in these matchups. So when you look at them, I don't know if it's necessarily how do you fix them, because we've seen Nate Oates tweak his lineup. He went from the same usual starters that we've seen the last several games against Auburn, and then against Missouri, he puts LeBaron Philon back in the starting group and takes Jaron Stevenson off and brings him off the bench. But is it more than just tweaking the lineup? Like what do you think is, or how do you think Alabama can go about having a better start to games, Tim?
I think you come right out with a couple of set plays, trying to get something easy, something cheap and easy. I mean, Cliff's been really good, lobs up there to the basket. I mean, I don't think necessarily coming down and shooting. I mean, it's their nature. You know, there's a saying, shooters shoot. There's no saying shooters defend. You got a lot of guys on this team that can score, and I think that's the mentality. They have a team that can outscore them, so it's not necessarily putting up a three-pointer or, Jaron in the corner. I think you're looking for good shots, especially when they come out 3 for 3. The first thing I do is defend those three. I defend those balls outside the arc would be the first thing I would do. But I would look inside. And I'll tell you one thing, I think kind of like, I'm not saying this team hit a wall, but I wonder how many big games can you get up in a row? I mean, it's big game after big game. You got 2 on the road. Those are considered big games. You got Auburn at home, considered the biggest game. Then you go to Missouri. It's not prime. I mean, there's a little bit of a letdown. Auburn really not struggled, but Arkansas really gave Auburn a good game last night, despite Arkansas's big boy being off. So there had to be a letdown from that game. And then you have that team getting hot. But I know Nate built that team because it's nothing but big games in the NCAA tournament. It doesn't matter 1 versus 16 seed, they're all big. So I think there's a little bit of everything mental, a little banged up. I think all that is. But to answer your question, I would run set plays trying to get the ball inside around the basket, because even a free throw is a point. Anything is a point when you do this. And I would definitely start maybe using a timeout at the end of the half just to sort my defense when I'm having issues stopping them and getting buckets.
What about you, Blake? What do you make of these slow starts, and maybe how do you think they can be fixed?
Yeah, I think it's not as simple as like it's the entire reason they lost, but also it literally is mathematically the margin that they've lost by the last 2 games.
It's crazy.
So like you can't have it, because then you spend the entire game trying to dig yourself out of a hole that you put yourself in 90, 120 seconds to open the game. And it's like you blink and now you're in a 10-point hole that you're trying to claw out of the rest of the game. So from a mentality perspective, it shifts you backwards. Like you're trying to, you're not trying to keep a lead, and you're trying to come back. And one thing that stands out to me, obviously the 9 and the 12 are bad for, like, you can't give up that many points early, but the 0 is also not good.
Yeah,
like you're
right.
not scoring out of the gate, which is strange because they scored 84 points against Auburn despite a really good defensive team in Auburn, despite not shooting well from the floor. And then they scored 98 on the road last night, even though they didn't score the first 2.5 minutes of the game. And so the offense is fine once they get rolling. It's just scoring that first bucket and getting the lid off that's been the problem. And there have been a lot of turnovers early. I don't know what that deal is. Like last night, I think they turned it over 2 or 3 times before the first time out. And then just not taking great shots. Like last night, they looked kind of shell-shocked, almost trying to go too fast to try to answer the points Missouri was scoring so quickly. And it led to not getting great shots. And, I don't know exactly what the answer is. I thought that putting another guard in the starting lineup for Jaron would help. Maybe you need to start an energy guy like Mo Diabate. Like maybe that's the kind of guy that you need in the starting lineup to give a bit of juice to start the game. I don't really know what the answer is. I don't know if Oates knows exactly what the answer is. I'm sure he's going to be spending these next 2 days trying to figure it out, because on Saturday, if you get out to a slow start against Kentucky, that's another team that can put up a lot of points in a hurry and take a 8-0, 9-0, 10-0 lead without even noticing what happened, because that's a team that can shoot the ball really well and is a good offensive team. So you need to avoid that going forward, especially against a team like Kentucky Saturday.
And we'll wrap up by looking ahead to that Kentucky game. It's the second time Alabama's faced Kentucky this year. It'll be the first at home. Last time out on January 18th, Alabama won 102-97 in a barn burner. But since that game, Kentucky's 4-4. They have losses to Vandy, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and Texas, but they beat Tennessee twice. So it's a team that's certainly capable. And when you look at it, though, just what do you think of this second matchup with Kentucky, and how much do you consider this a must-win game for Alabama at this point, Tim?
I don't think so. I think we're past the must-win, right? You're kind of, on the outside looking in to win the SEC regular season. I mean, you're 2 games behind an Auburn team that's doing very well. You still could win it, but I'm not saying, again, you controlled your own destiny until this game last night, the last two games, obviously. Even last night you controlled it, I believe. So I think now nothing's a must win because you're in the NCAA tournament. You've got a resume that's pretty impressive. Whether you're a 1 or 3 seed, it's not a whole lot of difference considering how they bracket everything, but I want to win it. I think they want to win it. And I think this is a good matchup. Kentucky's not a great defensive team. I think we're kind of overshadowed. Auburn is. Blake mentioned Auburn's a pretty good defensive team. Missouri's not shabby either. They're competitive. They're long. They got stretch. I don't know the analytics or their statistics or rankings there, but they're long. They move around. They compete very well. I know they hadn't given up 98 points all year. So, I mean, of course, they hadn't scored 110 either. So it's kind of hand in hand with that one. But I think it's a good matchup, and I think it's Kentucky. And I think when you're a team, I think you can get up for Kentucky because they're Kentucky. And there's not a kid on that roster, the Alabama roster, who doesn't know Kentucky's history. I mean, it's not like that they were growing up, they remember Adolph. They don't remember Adolph Rupp. John Calipari had these guys competing. So I think it's you want to win the next two because you want to be there in case there's a stumble. You still got a head-to-head matchup with Auburn that you can cut into that lead. You got a head-to-head matchup with Florida, who's another team right there at the top. I mean, you look at the SEC standings, Florida with 2 losses and Bama. You got teams Texas A&M and Missouri with 3 losses, Tennessee and Ole Miss with 4 losses. It's bananas. There's not a whole lot of difference, but I think right now you're just playing game by game, emotionally fixing some things, and you start defensively. And this is a good test defensively because, like Blake said, Kentucky, like y'all said, Kentucky can score, but also it's a good matchup for the offense.
I don't know if it's necessarily a must win, but I think Alabama needs this one. And I do think that you're playing for seeding right now, not just in the NCAA tournament, which I think you want to stay on that one line, but you want to still have a double bye in the SEC tournament. You start to lose some of these games down the stretch, and you might be playing a day earlier than you expected in Nashville. So it's must win at this point in the season, especially the way Alabama's played all year, seems a little harsh, but I think you're getting to that territory. This team needs something positive after these 2 games. And I think you're right, Tim. Like, the Kentucky jersey means something. And I don't think these guys are going to be – it's not going to be an Ole Miss situation. They're not going to sleep on Kentucky, even though they have beat them already this season. I think to be able to sweep them in the regular season would be something to hang your hat on. It continues to add to your resume. But what about you, Blake? Like, when you look at this game – how do you feel? Do you think it's a must win? Like, where's your mindset going into this matchup?
I mean, it's obviously not a must win in terms of like their season
important,
being in jeopardy or anything like that. But like, they need this one really bad because you look at a 1 seed is in jeopardy if you lose it. Because, I mean, after last night, they probably dropped to number 3 overall. I would assume Duke jumps them for that number 2 overall. And you really want a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That goes without saying. Like, that's your easiest path to the Final Four. It also gives you draws as far as locations and where you can actually get fans to go support you for these games. So that's on the line. If you lose this game, you're definitely out of the regular season title race, and then you're starting to worry about, keeping a high enough seed to get a good draw in the SEC tournament. You could lose that double bye, like you said. But also, if you lose this game, that would be a 3rd game in a row, a 2nd game in a row at home that you've lost, and you're looking ahead, and you've got games against Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, 3 in a row. So just from a mentality standpoint, like, it could cause a bit of a spiral here if you don't win this game. Like, I think losing a 3rd game in a row and knowing the tough games that are in front of you, like, that's daunting for any team. And so you could be staring down the barrel of losing, 4 or 5, even 6 of your last 7 if you drop another game here in a row. And obviously a basketball team isn't thinking the same way about their schedule as we are, kind of big picture analyzing it, but it's an important game. Like, they need to get back on track and start playing good basketball. You want to be playing your best basketball at the end of the year. They're not right now, but this is an opportunity for them to start getting on that track with some more opportunities in front of them.
We'll see if Alabama can take care of business on Saturday. That game tips off at 5 o'clock in Coleman Coliseum. If you've made it this far, Be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate that. Turn on that notification bell so you know when these videos are uploaded. If you're listening via podcast, we'd appreciate a 5-star rating and review. And again, we have that promo over at BOL. Be sure to take advantage of that if you haven't already. And for Blake, for Tim, I'm Charlie Potter. We'll see you guys on the next show.